welcome to today's post-Cabinet press briefing. Today at Cabinet, certain matters were discussed and ministers are here to speak to the media and to those who are joining us on radio, online, or on television. Both Minister Young and Minister Gopee-Scoon are here. Of course, Minister Gopee-Scoon has a challenge today because she has Senate. So let us get straight into it, and Minister Gopee-Scoon will go first.
Thank you very much, and good evening to... Thank you very much, and good afternoon to members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, all members of the viewing and listening audience. And I'm here to speak on the question of the increased price of flour, to continue with that discussion. And let me say that the government of Trinidad and Tobago is very concerned with the impact of the recent announcement made by both local producers, NFM and the private producer, of flour relating to price increases. And the fact is, we know and we understand flour is a very basic item in the food basket of almost all households, and we fully understand that this increase will be felt by many families across the country. We know the rationale. It's supply chain disruptions, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, the increased price of freight and shipping rates, the adverse weather conditions, and of course, more recently, export restrictions by many countries, including India, but Ghana, Egypt, Indonesia, Kosovo, and Serbia as well. So let's understand that the price is not at all within our control and really is symptomatic of the ongoing global food crisis. Only last month, the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization has warned that the conflict in Ukraine is preventing grain from leaving a major breadbasket of the world and making food more expensive across the globe, because we know that both Russia and the Ukraine account for approximately 30 to 40% of the world's export market for grain, including wheat. Most countries globally have increased the price of flour during 2022. However, even with this increase, Trinidad and Tobago, and I said it yesterday, I'll say it again, will still be on average 19% cheaper than CARICOM countries. The increase in the price of flour, which will now range from 10 to 33%, depending on the poundage and the quality of the flour and the producer, that would translate, and I looked at one of the 2 kg ibis flour, that translates, and also the ibis and the other flour produced by NFM, the Lotus, it will account to a $2 to $4 increase in the 2 kg package. All right, depending, of course, on where you shop. And we have already started monitoring some of these prices. I'll tell you about that later. So we've been very vigilant in the government at the level of the Ministry of Trade and Industry, the level of the Ministry of Finance as well, in monitoring the events globally. And we have been in dialogue with NFM more recently in respect of ensuring that the company secures enough grain from its international suppliers. And we're very fortunate that NFM has been able to secure sufficient wheat stocks to guarantee that Trinidad and Tobago has an adequate supply of flour for the remainder of 2022. And of course, the same applies to the private producer. But I want to clarify something. The grain is not in stock, because people are saying, then why are the prices increasing? Because the grain is in stock. It's not that. What they've engaged in is forward buying, both NFM and also the other local producer. They've engaged in forward buying. And as you know, that is sometimes, because of the risk involved in forward buying, it's at an even heavier price, an increased price. But the point is availability. We're pretty much assured of availability to the end of the year, and we continue to monitor the situation as we go along. So that, and I'll tell you, we've put pressure on NFM. They've also been aggressively examining the feasibility of alternative wheat types. And I have a study on it here. I can give you the media details at another time. And potentially lower cost suppliers. So they've looked across the globe at what is available, the quality that is available, the protein as well. So the composition, the protein content, the quality and the consistency of these alternatives are not in keeping with the current product that is produced in Trinidad and Tobago by the food and beverage sector. So I can tell you that if they were to produce, if let's say they were to insist on buying a sub-quality product, it means that they would be, the manufacturer would then have to reformulate their recipes, etc., and so on. And the protein content remains always a source of content. So the work has been done, and I'm satisfied by NFM that they've reviewed all possibilities of sources, quality, etc., and whether or not they're workable. And to ensure that the availability of food generally and inputs into manufacturing, government again has been very proactive during fiscal 2022. I can tell you, I remind you that as a result of the foresight of the government, Ministry of Finance in particular to ensure the stability of the domestic supply of the essential goods, increased supplies of FX were made available to Exim Bank, and to address the financing requirements of both the importers and the manufacturers. And as at May 22, the approved amount by Cabinet would have been $980 million, close to $1 billion, translating to more than 6.5 billion TT dollars, all right, under the two facilities as which we know it, the Forex facility for manufacturers, which is where $450 million has been allocated, and the Forex allocation system for the importation of raw materials, basic goods, pharmaceuticals, etc., essential goods, another $530 million. So the effects of this form of support has been that throughout the pandemic and throughout the war crisis, this war between two countries is affecting the rest of the globe. Throughout these two crises, there's never been any shortage of food and basic essentials in Trinidad and Tobago, unlike many other countries, first world countries, the US, other developed countries and developing countries. We have not had any shortages in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, we've moved ahead and we've zero-rated basic food items. You know that. We've also sought the continued suspension and very costly to the government of the CET on a list of over 20 basic food items. So, as it is, and yesterday I spoke about temporary. I said use the word temporary, and I think the opposition may have been a little bit disgusted with that, but I meant temporary as against permanent, right? But we are living through uncertain times. Let's accept that. Everything is unpredictable as with regards to the war and the supply of these basic items, grain items in particular. And we don't know how long the crisis will last, but we do know that it's not a permanent situation. And I'll tell you that there are encouraging signs that wheat production is improving in some markets, but we are not yet seeing the availability in terms of the exports. But there is improvement in the supply. Over the last 2 days, we witnessed a slight decrease in the price of soya and wheat and so on, but it's extremely volatile, so we expect it to be up and down. So the safe position that NFM and the other producer, the private producer, has taken in terms of forward buying and ensuring that we have it, that's the safe way to go because of the volatility and so on. So, but again, I also take the opportunity to again confirm to the population that both producers have given the assurance that they will adjust their prices in line with market conditions. So we ourselves at the level of government will be monitoring closely. Now, government wants to help more because we understand the impact of this, as I said earlier, on many, many families. And so we do want to assist the poor and the vulnerable. And this is why yesterday when I spoke in Parliament, I said that we are reviewing what's possible. But there are some difficulties with that. So we've done yes, there's no VAT. Yes, there's no duty on the imports of these ingredients, the wheat and so on. However, we have to remember, in coming up with the solutions, there are some complexities in that government is a 51% shareholder in the NFM, and we may consider perhaps should be subsidized. However, it's not a quick, so we can't easily run to that because there's a situation of the private producer. And the question must always be, can we utilize taxpayers' monies to support private business? So those are the kinds of complexities and the difficult situation that we're in. And of course, one will always also consider, if you're going to subsidize flour, we look at that, for instance, you have to look at the other basic foods that have been going up. And I don't want to go into all of that, right? But I'm giving you the extent of the review and some of the analysis that we have to take into account in finding the right solution. But the commitment is, and we've been doing it since COVID-19. This government has continued to support the poor and vulnerable through a range of measures, through the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, also through other ministries, ministry responsible for youth and so on, and other agencies as well. But at this stage, we realize that we have to try to assist, especially with this very basic item. The Ministry of Finance, the rest of the government, the cabinet, we are reviewing what the policy possibilities are, but understanding the complexities in determining what's the right solution. It's very easy to say, okay, let's go to those who receive social development assistance, but that's a narrow net. That's a narrow net because many, many more households are in fact feeling the pinch with this increase in flour, which is a really basic item. You're right? So we are considering, the government, through the Ministry of Finance, we are actively considering the options to mitigate the impact on citizens. And in this regard, we really hope that we can report back to the population in under 2 weeks, or at least say something and commit something to you. However, it's an imperative on my part at this time to really make an appeal to the retailers, the shopkeepers, the supermarkets, groceries, bakers, corner stores, really to do their part as well and be reasonable. The truth is, we all have to do our part. Government, retailers and business people, and also the consumers, right? I have heard in recent times some retailers have been having like 40 to 60% markups on some staple products. That can't be right. And already, Consumer Affairs is already noticing very large variances in the increase in price of flour. We are noticing it already. I can tell you who they are, but I'm not yet ready to name and shame. But there are those who are holding stock of the item which they bought at a particular price, and they've already gone up. And I have the names, but let's give them a few days, and we can talk about this again, right? But the point about it is we expect that retailers would be reasonable, wholesalers and retailers, yes, and really, not act in an unconscionable way, and of course think of the citizenry. They've all done very well, these retailers, during the COVID period. Let's please be reasonable. Keep your citizens in mind by controlling your markups, again, as we try to navigate these very trying times and to ensure that no one is left behind. And the responsibility, as I said, is is by all. I really want to appeal to the consumers as I end, while government and business will do their part. This situation, we acknowledge is affecting your livelihood. This calls for some introspection on your spend, how you eat, how you spend, the well-being of yourselves, your families. People have to think about the NCDs. We have a serious issue in Trinidad and Tobago, and perhaps it's almost a bit of a wake-up call. Am I eating the right thing in the right amounts? Let's think about all of these things as well. Yes? So I think there's a call to all, government, business, and also citizens to really ensure that we make the right steps at this time. But I end by giving you the assurance that government is proactive and is looking very closely at the ways in which it can assist the poor and vulnerable, and that we will be back to you with the solution, considering all the complexities. We will be back to you in the shortest period possible. Thank you. May I take questions? Okay.
We'll move on to Minister Young, and then we'll move straight into questions.
Minister Gopee-Scoon has to get to the Senate, so I'll just report to you all what I've come here to report, and then you can direct your questions to her, and I will take any questions after she leaves. I have come here this afternoon to address you all on the Commission of Inquiry into the tragic death of the 4 LMCS employees at the end of February of this year. As you all know, shortly after this incident took place, the Cabinet, the government, took a decision to appoint a commission of inquiry to look into the circumstances surrounding this tragic occasion where 4 LMCS Limited divers lost their lives. We appointed the esteemed the Honourable Mr. Justice Dennis Morrison out of Jamaica, a very well-known, experienced jurist from Jamaica, to lead this, to chair it, and Mr. Gregory Wilson, a subsea specialist, to provide him with support. And it will be a 2-man commission of inquiry with Mr. Ramesh Lawrence Maraj and his team as counsel to the commission. Within the past few days, I've received the resignation of Mr. Justice Dennis Morrison for personal reasons, and we can't expand. He didn't expand on the personal reasons. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Justice Dennis Morrison for agreeing initially to undertake the task. As you all are aware, he came, he was sworn in, he met with counsel to commission. A lot of work has been going on between the 2 commissioners and Mr. Ramesh Lawrence Maraj and his team, the setting up of the secretariat for the commission. All of that has been taking place. I'm pleased to say that Cabinet has today immediately approved and confirmed a replacement for Mr. Justice Dennis Morrison, and that replacement, who came very highly recommended, is a Mr. Jerome Lynch, Queen's Counsel. Mr. Jerome Lynch is a Queen's Counsel, Jamaican-born, has practiced in London and within recent times in Bermuda and other areas of the Caribbean. As I say, he's Jamaican-born, so he has an understanding of the setting in our Caribbean region. I was just going through his CV, so he has accepted, and Cabinet has today approved and confirmed Mr. Jerome Lynch QC to be the replacement for Mr. Justice Dennis Morrison as the chairman of this Commission of Inquiry. Just to give you a bit of his background, he was called to the bar at Lincoln's Inn in 1983. I offer my sympathy to him for that. I was Gray's Inn, which is a much better bar. He took silk in 2000. He became a bencher of Lincoln's Inn in 2008, and he's practiced extensively and has a lot of experience. So we look forward to welcoming Mr. Lynch. One of the discussions I had with him before he undertook the task, subject to Cabinet's approval, of being the chairman of this Commission of Inquiry, is that they would be able to stick to the original timetables that they set out when Mr. Justice Morrison was here, and that Mr. Ramesh Lawrence Maraj, Senior Counsel, has been talking to the population about, which is the commencement of their procedural hearings in the month of August. That is still on track. Mr. Lynch is going to get here. We're going to have him sworn in the shortest possible time frame. Hopefully we'll be able to make that announcement very shortly. I'm actually aiming at next week, but we have to make the necessary arrangements. And they're not going to break the stride. I've been in constant contact with Mr. Ramesh Lawrence Maraj as well as Mr. Gregory Wilson, and they've given the assurance that they've continued to do the work. I know the secretariat is being set up. We had appointed a secretary to the Commission of Inquiry, and Mr. Lynch understands the task, and he is very much up for it. So I look forward to us being able to welcome the new chairman of this Commission of Inquiry, Mr. Jerome Lynch, to Trinidad and Tobago to undertake this task and for it to proceed. Of course, you all would recall at the outset, shortly after this tragic incident, the government had announced that we would have had statutory inquiry coming out of the Ministry of Energy. There was a lot of uproar from the opposition at that time. That would have been long completed because the time frame for that would have been 45 days. We did caution at the time with a commission of inquiry. It is outside of the government's control. There must be an independent commission of inquiry. We are not the ones setting their timetable, setting the time frame. They are the ones who have done so. I'm assured that they will continue to try to keep to the procedural hearings in August, and in short time frame I expect Mr. Lynch, Mr. Ramesh Lawrence Maraj, and the second commissioner, Mr. Wilson, to be able to talk to the population and say what is their intention in keeping this timetable. So I thank you all for that. I will take any questions after Minister Gopee-Scoon takes her questions, as she has to run to the Senate. Thank you.
Yes. So questions for Minister Gopee-Scoon first.
That one of the things the government would have to consider in its options would be the issue of the state subsidizing the operations of a private company with regard to the issue of the flour price issue. But isn't there a precedent before in terms of the CRICO bailout, where the government has in the past intervened where it saw fit to do so? Although two different circumstances, I'm looking at the principle.
No, let me just say that what I said is that we would not do it, having regard to the fact that there's also a private producer, so it's not an option.
And if it's not an option, and then let's say, for example, because you talked about the international market conditions as exist now, there could be another issue of a potential increase again in the near future. What then would it seems to be a very difficult situation, yes, but what direct intervention can the government undertake to ensure we don't have, let's say, another major increase in the price of the wholesale price of flour?
Well, again, we're guided. I mean, both producers will be guided by the price of these products. They've booked their supply of wheat until the end of 2022. And so that they know the price that they're doing that at. And, of course, they would need to get the necessary foreign exchange and all those considerations. So I think pretty much we can say, unless, of course, there's some intervention by the provider of wheat to them. But if it is that they have gone through the process of forward buying, I would say that there is some certainty that they would be able to secure at the prices that they have engaged contractually at. I'm thinking that it's a contractual engagement, and therefore those are the prices that they will be stuck with. But at the same time, given the volatility of the situation, if anything happens, we are looking on, we are monitoring, government is closely reviewing, and with both the private and having this, and of course NFM, which falls under my remit, and the Minister of Finance as well.
There's one other question. The issue of, let's say, fixing the price by the state. That's also something that would not be an option.
Government doesn't do price controls. We haven't been doing it. I can tell you, since I'm in this government, since close to 7 years now, we have not. But we don't engage in price controls. That's a thing of the past. But of course, we expect that our retailers would be reasonable, and I've said that, and I'm saying to you that I already have the data, the information on those who have already increased, and I think that is probably unnecessarily so, given that they would have had stocks. But let's give a few days. Let's see where the prices settle. I'm going to ensure that the Consumer Affairs Division reports on flour in particular, let's see, in another few days by the end of the month, exactly who's selling what, so that consumers could be guided by where they ought to make their purchases.
Is there... Can I just add one thing to that as well, Paula,
Sure.
if you don't mind?
No.
This also opens an opportunity for a conversation around our local alternatives. And of course, we are seeing NAMDEVCO leading the charge with that. Just this weekend, NAMDEVCO is going to have demonstrations using flour derived from our indigenous root crops at Mokoya on Sunday and at the Queen's Park Savannah on Saturday. So this really does give an opportunity for that conversation and for people to look at that as a real alternative to imported flour.
And can I add a healthier alternative?
My small question is whether there is or could be a criminal offence related to price gouging, such as fraud. If you know you bought something at X price and you're pretending to have paid a much higher price for it, or if in the contract which you have to purchase from NFM, if within that contract there are terms that stipulate it will be sold at a certain markup, but you are now taking those items and pretending it was, should this be...
Well, I'll tell you that, yes, the monitoring takes place at the level of the Consumer Affairs Division. There is no there are no price controls, as I said, in Trinidad and Tobago at this time. And the Fair Trading Commission also has a responsibility with regard to monitoring of price gouging as well. Now, they are quite independent, but I am sure that they are well aware of the situation, and I'm sure that they will make the necessary interventions with the producers and also perhaps retailers. I'm sure they would have something to say on this.
I mean, I did have a teeny-weeny other question about the substitutes. Realistically, if you go now to buy breadfruit, well, I think last time I paid about $20 for it. I don't know what it is now. But is there anything really comparatively as cheap as flour? I mean, the conversations are good to have. In terms of, let's say, abundance, you could plant the land with breadfruit trees, as Mr. Bermudez is doing now. But in terms of actual minimum price, is there actually compatible for a very poor family? Can a poor family switch from buying that sack of flour to fry up every day to living on cassava, eddos, and so on? I mean, the price compatibility.
Quite frankly, you really should have a breadfruit tree, right, by now. We've been talking about growing your own food and growing what you eat. Many people should have something in their backyards. But that apart, the commercial quantities, to my mind, are not large enough on the scale where there would, in fact, be a price that is comparable to flour. But the point is, it's available. It's your diet. You're preparing a meal, and instead of just eating bread and let's say bread and egg and so on buljol, it might be less sadder, more booty, which you have grown, or some kind of short crop. But it's the composition of your meal that you have to pay attention to. Again, I am re-emphasizing, I can't tell anybody, government can't tell people what to cook. We will not do that. But the point is, we're also looking at the health considerations as well. And this is an opportunity. It presents an opportunity. We have the highest incidence of NCDs in the Caribbean. Let's not forget that. So it's a composition of your meal, and that's what we would advise consumers to do, to look very carefully. And this is why we are also prepared as a government to come in and assist, right? But we expect that there would be the ramping up of the production of these alternatives. I had a discussion with Novo Supplies. Now, if you go to Extra Foods, you would see all of the cassava fries, dashing fries, sweet potato fries as well. Now, in doing the cassava fries, and quite naturally, the cost is already there, built in. There are remnants from the fries, which can be utilized in making flour. So the cost implications for Novo would be a lot less. He's not starting from scratch, let me take cassava and make flour. But by making the fries, they cut precisely. So there are leftovers, and that is what can be used. And I was having that conversation with him only last night by text, asking what are the likely prices for the commercial production of cassava flour. And that's the kind of conversations. Everybody's talking. Minister, you may want to add something?
Yes, I also believe that one of the largest producers of cassava flour in the Caribbean is based right here in Trinidad. I believe it's a company called Slim Down 360.
Yes.
I know them because they were a success story coming out of Nedco. And I know that they have been driving down their prices through the use of technology year on year. So as demand grows, as we have this as part of a real conversation around our diet, production costs will drop as well, and of course basic economics, and we should see an impact on the price to retail to the end user as well. So if we have to try to find a silver lining, I suppose that is one, that we have an opportunity now to look at healthier indigenous sources of flour that are a long-term solution to a real problem that we have now.
If I may just interject, just before you pose the next question to Minister Gopee-Scoon, I think a missing part of the conversation I've been listening to for the past few minutes is to put it in context of what is going on globally. Yeah? So when you look at what has been going on globally, so for example, at the Summit of the Americas, one of the big topics of conversation was food security. This is certainly not a Trinidad and Tobago issue. You look at all of the countries in the world right now, it is taking place. I can tell you all in particular, in South America, you have all of the countries in South America who are agri-based countries starting to worry about fertilizer. The use of fertilizer in the United States is taking a different complexity of conversation, and the farmers in the United States are actually changing the crops that they're planning to grow because of these things. So it is not a Trinidad and Tobago thing. It's not a Trinidad and Tobago government thing. What Minister Gopee-Scoon is quite accurately saying is we are monitoring it as well. We are going to do the best we can, but I think it is very necessary for us to understand. When you look at what is going on in the United Kingdom, there were actually recent protest actions at rising food prices. President Biden, right there at the Summit of the Americas, the biggest question he was answering domestically was inflation and these types of things. So we will do what we can here, as you've heard both ministers talk about. There are certain personal decisions we can take. We are not at all comfortable at what is going on. The minister is doing a monitoring situation out of a ministry along with the Ministry of Finance, and they will do what they can and come back and report. But the point I'd like to get across is this is a global issue that is taking place, and there's very little that we can do to influence global prices.
Charlene Rampersad from Guardian Media. Minister Gopee-Scoon, you answered Jewel's question about price control. But that, at this point in time, that might be the only mechanism to protect consumers from price gouging. Why is the government so hesitant to return to that system?
I mean, I don't think it might be necessary. We would use influence and, of course, continue to have discussions. As I said, Consumer Affairs would give the information where it's available. Consumers would have the power of deciding where they're going to buy and so on. I don't think that we would come to that place where we left off so many years ago. So I think that we could depend on market conditions and influence and suasion to ensure that prices are kept to a minimum. But I do make a strong appeal to the retailers, in particular, the 40 and 60% markups generally that we're seeing on very basic items. Unacceptable. Because there are supermarkets that are retailing, that are doing markups at 25%, I know, on basic items, and sometimes lower. So we ask them not to be unconscionable. This is a time of crisis in terms of food security for the world, not Trinidad and Tobago. Minister Young was so right. This is not about us alone, not just about the region. This is about the world. It's a global situation.
And given that you said before we are in uncertain times, how long do you think the government is going to hold on to the hope that retailers would be swayed morally to keep their prices within a certain range until or...
Well, let's say that we will continue to monitor. I don't expect the war to last forever. We hope, we pray, but we will always continue to monitor and act in the best interest of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, especially the poor and vulnerable, as we have done during the COVID period and as we continue to do. And in supporting small businesses and medium-sized businesses, we have extended our loan guarantee facility and so on. So our support has been wide from COVID, and it's being extended at this time. I give you the assurance, give the population the assurance that government is concerned about the welfare of the citizens and will continue to monitor and act appropriately.
Minister, is there a time frame as to how soon we could expect some kind of announcement about targeted intervention in terms of the poor, the vulnerable, and also you mentioned the wider society as well? Any specific details? How soon could we expect that?
What I certainly said to you earlier that we would come to the population in under 2 weeks. So I gave that commitment, but I can assure you that we are looking at it and discussing it every day. And as soon as we are able to come up with something, we will do that within our circumstances as well, within the circumstances of the government. We will.
Does this lend to the issue also of local food production and whether or not there's been enough to deal with that in terms of increasing local food production?
More can always be done. And now we have had a stimulus program of 300 million TT dollars. Monies have been given out to farmers. There's a grant of $100,000 for which there are not any significant requirements. That has worked well. And this is from the days, this early COVID days, we came out with that program. So the stimulus package is there. In addition to which, the Minister with responsibility for youth development has several programs on the table for youth agriculture. They're very attractive. The offering of homesteads and an apprenticeship program and appropriate funding, so that government has done its part. The population, again, we will continue to sensitize you to the fact that this is the way we must go to ensure that there is food security, and work with our neighbors, work with Guyana. Guyana has said, we know of the Jagdeo initiative. We now know of the more recent initiative put forward, which CARICOM has adopted, which is to reduce to the 25 by 2025 to reduce the imports of the food imports by 25% by 2025. Mr. Young, did I get it right? 25 by 25. Yes, to reduce the imports by 25%. So that there is an all of CARICOM approach as well. We want the population, and we're doing very much. We're doing much. We now have 3 ministers in the Ministry of Agriculture, right? And personnel in the Office of the Prime Minister. We're doing our part. We want the citizens to do their part as well. Do something in your backyard. Yeah? Or in your porch, if you live in an apartment. I threw that for some people here. Vertical planting, it's called. Okay, can I leave?
Right. Minister, one more question, and any one of you three can answer. So we were on the streets yesterday speaking to members of the public about the increase in the cost of flour. And one thing that a lot of people said was the cost of food and other items are going up and their salaries are staying the same. We saw a post from the Ministry of Labour today talking about the minimum wage being $17.50 and that resulting in about $3,100 per month for anyone working on the minimum wage. Are there any discussions at the level of cabinet to increase the minimum wage in this year's budget?
All right, let me intervene on that question. The government is looking, as you've heard the 2 ministers say, very closely at what is happening. As you are very aware right now, certainly when it comes to public servant salary negotiations, those are taking place and they're being directed from the Ministry of Finance, the Chief Personnel Officer, etc. So all of those things are going on. I think that advertisement by the Ministry of Labour was just to try to put things in context with respect to the minimum wage. There is nothing that isn't on the table for the government. We are constantly looking on, we're constantly talking amongst ourselves as to what are some of the initiatives that can be taken. A short while ago, that is why I intervened, just to tell you this is not a conversation that is limited here domestically in Trinidad and Tobago, but our responsibility is to Trinidad and Tobago. There are a lot of balancing factors. So right now, everything is on the table. We are constantly considering what can be done. There's a lot of social intervention, I can tell you, that takes place in Trinidad and Tobago compared to our neighboring CARICOM countries. There is a lot, if you go and do the comparison, if the media does a comparison about what you can get in Trinidad and Tobago compared to other CARICOM countries, we will be at the top of that table. It does not preclude us from looking at anything that we can within reason. There are a lot of things taking place. We're still subsidizing heavily fuel prices. So a lot of our money, a lot of our expenditure, a lot of our free cash flow is going in that fuel price. Every single day, the Minister of Finance and I are monitoring the cost of these things and discussing initiatives and what can be done to help the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
You said all that, and you said nothing is off the table, but has an increase in the minimum wage been discussed at the level of cabinet?
I'm not going to tell you what has gotten involved and what are the discussions that are taking place at cabinet. A lot of discussions take place. A lot of discussions are taking place, and at this stage, there's nothing to announce coming out of with respect to the minimum wage.
I just wondering, Minister, as you mentioned.
Sorry, Minister Gopee-Scoon has to run now to to the Senate, so she can be excused.
Just to follow up on what you said just now in terms of the price of fuel. There was a recent increase in the price of fuel. It's still a fixed price at the fuel pump, but this, of course, now you have that added to the increase in
Absolutely,
wholesale.
and that is why I'm saying that the conversation is a global conversation. You're looking at global cost rising, so it is really about what can we do internally, what can be done internally, what can be done on the food security side, exactly as the two ministers have been saying with our indigenous growth of products. What I can't think of any more incentives that can be given in the agriculture sector. Every single year we sit with Minister of Agriculture and the Minister of Finance, and we've looked at it. I don't think there's anything else that can be done in here. So it's really for people to go and work it. But what I'm saying is we are looking at it, we are very aware, especially those of us who are elected members of Parliament. When you're meeting with your constituents, when you're hearing, when you're seeing, we are very, very aware of it. And we are taking the responsible steps. And as I say, nothing is off the table at this stage.
These issues, the price of fuel presently, the price of wholesale flour, and of course the impact on the retail side, will that now add a new level of focus in terms of the conversations between the state representative and the various trade unions in terms of the collective agreements for the public servants, the public service?
Let's leave the negotiations where they are between the bodies that are there. The CPO will be given his directions, but at this stage, none of us are going to say anything on that because it is going through the proper process.
And also, Minister, this particular situation with the economy right now, has that given the government a bit of a pause in terms of the discussion that you had said in terms of the plan for fully lifting the fixed price at the fuel pumps?
Fuel liberalization. As I said in the Parliament just a couple of weeks ago in answer to a question, that continues to be on the cards. The government has passed the legislation for fuel liberalization, but we are aware the reason it hasn't been fully implemented as yet is because the government has continued to take a decision to assist the citizens by absorbing some of that cost. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Over $1 billion being provided this year alone in fuel subsidization. So it is something we're doing. So it's not to say anybody who gives a conversation the government is doing nothing. That is completely false.
I wonder as well too, so for example, let's say, as you said, the government plans to do it. At some point you will announce when it will be done. But then there's the issue of, let's say, what are the cushions in terms of, for persons that say you have the issue of mass transportation, for example, is that something being looked at as well?
So the answer is yes. The mass transportation, the Ministry of Works and Transport is looking at, the Prime Minister announced a few months ago, at a fleet of new buses, electric vehicles. So obviously if you're electric vehicle buses, the sooner we can get that into the mass transportation system, the better, because they're not using fuel. All right, yes, there's electricity generation, but that's natural gas. So you're looking at that. But even in the conversations and the consideration for fuel liberalization, if and when that may come, and I'm not saying that we're any closer to that today, for the reason I've just given, that the government is conscious of our citizens are having to deal with these increased prices. All right, so we're very conscious of that. But even when we were having those discussions months and months ago, a big part of those discussions were how do we deal with the most vulnerable in society, not the ones who can afford it, but the most vulnerable in society, and how do we target any intervention for the most vulnerable in society. So not those who can more than afford it, who have 2, 3, 4 cars, high-level cars, etc., but those who really need it, who we have to step in for at the more vulnerable levels of society. So I can assure that is a big part of the government's conversation and discussions.
Right. Minister, if we could switch gears for a bit. We haven't heard an official statement on the Prime Minister. How is he, where is he, how is he doing, when is he due to returning to TNT? What can you tell us?
What I can tell you at this stage, as far as I am aware, and I was in contact with the Prime Minister up to this morning, He is in good spirits. He's doing well. He will talk when he returns, as he always does, about what he's undergone, etc. But certainly his words to me is he's doing extremely well, all is good, and that we can expect him to return very shortly.
I'm sorry to be the one to say this. I don't know if you just let something out of the bag, because there are certain colloquialisms that we use as people. In good spirits, he's doing well. I don't know if you just, he'll talk about what he's on.
Anything out of the bag. The Prime Minister has always addressed, when he's returned to Trinidad and Tobago, his own personal issues. It is not me to come here, or anybody to come here unless directed by the Prime Minister to give a report on his health. So to assure the population that as far as I am aware, the Prime Minister is doing very well.
There was one of your colleagues had been abroad and without on official business. This is Attorney General, and there wasn't really any detail given. It was just this vague thing, official business. And is there enough formality in the system for notifying the public of these foreign trips, and like the period for how long and what the business items should be and so on? Is there enough formality?
I certainly think so, yes. He was very clear. The release said how long he would be out of the jurisdiction for. He was away on official business. When he returned, I saw in some release or in him answering a question, he said that he couldn't provide more details. I can tell you it was pre-scheduled, way in advance, and I don't want to say anything more than that.
Minister Ahmed, if it's official government business, why can't he provide any details on the purpose of his trip, especially if it was pre-scheduled?
There are a lot of good reasons for that. So, for example, if is assisting in certain other matters, etc., that can't be discussed, that would be one of the reasons.
And as we are on the subject of the AG, you said you've been in contact with the Prime Minister up to this morning. Has he discussed the ongoing matter with the AG with the rest of the Cabinet?
The Prime Minister with the rest of the Cabinet?
With the Cabinet, sir.
The Prime Minister is out of the country on his own personal business. The Prime Minister hasn't had any discussion with the Cabinet. There's nothing for the Prime Minister to discuss with the Cabinet until he gets back.
He's had no discussion on the issues surrounding
I can't say who the Prime Minister has spoken to, etc. So the answer for your question, has the Prime Minister addressed the Cabinet? The answer is no.
You had a conversation with the Prime Minister.
I am not discussing what the Prime Minister and I discuss.
Is there any update on the issue of the representation of Trinidad and Tobago with regard to the Miami, the Piapia Court matter in Miami?
The Attorney General's office has already addressed that. As I understand it, the matter is under appeal and we're awaiting the outcome. He has said very carefully, very cautiously, it's sub judice. There's nothing more that can be said at this stage. Meaning it is frontally before the courts.
Do you have any opinion yourself as to whether he would have reacted quickly enough to try to correct the record in his affidavit matter of being junior, senior?
No.
And you had been an attorney before coming into politics.
Still an attorney.
Still are. And similar move. Do you have any advice to offer colleagues? Because there was a press conference yesterday where he was being bowled some quite hard balls by reporters, but there was a stage of rather bluntness in reply. I think there was one reply that said, because I said so. Do you have any words to offer of advice, how to be charming and witty in one's responses?
It's not sure. It's certainly not for me to offer advice to anyone. I'm sure that the Attorney General, who is a very, very experienced attorney, senior counsel, he handled himself in the way that he needed to handle himself. It's certainly not for me to offer any advice as to how you deal with anyone, including the media.
We're getting close to the end, so maybe just one last question.
In terms of the issue of what we had discussed earlier, right, in terms of food prices and so on and whatnot, the whole economic situation, the issue of the tax regime, is that something that could be or is being looked at as you go into the next fiscal year?
When you say the issue of the tax regime, what are you talking about specifically?
fixed in terms of
tax rates,
Yes,
etc. I think let me just try to sum it up. Everything is on the table when it comes to the government. The government, every year when we prepare the budget, we have very fulsome discussions, even way in advance of that. The Minister of Finance reaches out, he meets with the various chambers, he meets with the unions, he does a lot of consultation, as we all do. Then there are discussions as to what should form part of this annual budget. That exercise will take place, as it always does, every year. And I'm very sure that the Minister of Finance and the rest of Cabinet will have a fulsome discussion as to what is available. It would be very, very premature of me to get into any such discussion.
Minister, as it relates to the sabotage of oil pipe in Faizabad this morning, we saw reports that 10 acres of land was affected because somebody cut a pipe, basically letting the oil run free. Do you have any comment on that?
I have not received any report on that. We literally left Cabinet just before Cabinet finished to come here. I did see someone reported that there was a cutting of a pipe. I haven't been able to verify whether that is so or not. You are using the word sabotage. If there's sabotage, I hope there's a proper investigation to see whether they can find who the persons who are responsible for that. For it would be very, very irresponsible, criminal behavior if somebody went and intentionally cut a working oil pipeline to cause the kind of damage you've just described. Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the members of media who have joined us and for those looking on and listening at home and online. We continue to come to you all with matters from the Cabinet to speak with the public. And I want to thank you all for all coming out and see you again soon. Bye.
This is TTT. Live for local.